What would you do if your 11-year-old child could remember every detail of everything they'd ever read? Sarah Chen thought it was just an unusual gift until her adopted son Daniel started connecting patterns in corporate financial reports that even Wall Street analysts had missed. She never imagined that his extraordinary memory would uncover a fraud so massive that it would topple one of Portland's most powerful men. Before we get to this wonderful story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now let's get back to the story. Daniel Chen had been reading since age 3, but it wasn't until he turned 5 that Sarah realized her adopted son's mind worked differently than other children. While his classmates struggled with picture books, Daniel was absorbing encyclopedias, remembering every word, every diagram, every footnote with perfect clarity. Teachers called it a blessing, then a concern, then finally a problem, when Daniel began correcting textbooks and pointing out errors in their lesson plans. "He's too intense," his third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had warned Sarah during a parent conference. "The other children find him unsettling. He remembers conversations from months ago, quotes entire passages from books verbatim. It's not normal behavior for a child his age." Sarah had nodded politely, but inside she felt the familiar protective fire that came with raising a child no one understood. As head librarian at Portland Public Library, she'd seen all kinds of minds, all types of intelligence. Daniel's gift wasn't a problem to be solved, it was a treasure to be nurtured. That's how Daniel had ended up spending most afternoons in the quiet corners of the library, surrounded by stacks of books that would challenge graduate students. Sarah had given him free rein to explore any section, read anything that caught his interest. She never imagined that his curiosity would lead him to the business and legal section, where public corporate filings were kept for citizen access. It started innocently enough. Daniel had been reading about famous businessmen in American history when he'd stumbled across current SEC filing documents. The numbers fascinated him, not because he understood their significance, but because he could see patterns emerging from the data that seemed inconsistent with the historical success stories he'd been reading about. "Mom," Daniel had asked one evening over dinner, "why do some companies report different numbers in different documents about the same thing?" Sarah paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "Like Morrison Financial," Daniel explained, his young face serious. "In their annual report to shareholders, they say they made $847 million in profit last year. But in their SEC filing, they reported $623 million to the government, and in their tax documents, they claimed they only made $312 million. Sarah set down her fork entirely. "Daniel, where are you getting these numbers?" "From the public files at the library. They're all there if you know where to look." Daniel pulled out a notebook filled with his careful handwriting, columns of numbers, dates, and cross-references that looked more like an accountant's audit than a child's hobby. "Honey," Sarah said gently, "those are very complex financial documents. Sometimes there are different accounting methods." "But the dates are the same," Daniel interrupted, flipping through his notebook. "Same fiscal year, same time period, same company. The numbers should match, shouldn't they?" Sarah studied her son's work, her concern growing. Daniel had always been thorough, but this level of detail suggested he'd been working on this analysis for weeks, possibly months. "How long have you been collecting this information?" she asked. "Since September," Daniel replied matter-of-factly. "I started with Morrison Financial because Mr. Morrison came to the library for that charity event, remember? You said he was one of Portland's most successful businessmen, so I wanted to understand how his company worked." Sarah's heart sank. Marcus Morrison was indeed one of Portland's most prominent figures, CEO of Morrison Financial, major philanthropist, and a man whose influence extended throughout Oregon's political and business circles. If Daniel was suggesting what she thought he was suggesting, "Daniel," she said carefully, "these are serious accusations. You're essentially saying that Mr. Morrison's company is lying about their finances." "I'm not saying anything," Daniel replied with the literal precision that sometimes frustrated his teachers. "I'm just showing you the numbers. The numbers don't match." That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Sarah sat at her kitchen table studying her son's notebook. Her background was in library science, not finance, but even she could see the discrepancies Daniel had identified. The variations were too large and too systematic to be explained by different accounting methods. She considered her options. She could dismiss it as a child's misunderstanding of complex financial matters. She could quietly return the documents to the library and redirect Daniel's interests elsewhere. Or she could take the possibility seriously that her 11-year-old son had stumbled onto something significant. The decision was made for her the next morning when she found Daniel in the library before it officially opened, somehow having gotten past the security system, sitting at his usual table with even more documents spread around him. "Daniel Chen, how did you get in here?" Sarah demanded, though she kept her voice low in deference to the library's atmosphere. "The side door was unlocked," Daniel said without looking up from his reading. "Mom, I found something else. Look at this." Against her better judgment, Sarah approached the table. Daniel had arranged documents chronologically, creating a timeline of Morrison Financial's reporting from the past 5 years. "See the pattern?" Daniel asked, pointing to his carefully drawn charts. "Every year the discrepancies get bigger. In 2019, the difference between their shareholder report and their tax filing was only $50 million. But last year, it was over $500 million. Sarah studied the timeline, feeling a chill run down her spine. If Daniel was right, Morrison Financial wasn't just making bookkeeping errors. They were systematically defrauding both investors and the government, and the scale was increasing annually. "Daniel," she said slowly, "do you understand what this means?" "It means Mr. Morrison is lying," Daniel replied with characteristic directness, "and it means he's stealing money from people who trusted him." Sarah looked at her son, this brilliant, unusual child who saw patterns others missed, who remembered details others forgot. She thought about Marcus Morrison's public image, his charitable donations, his political connections. Then she thought about Daniel's gift, his absolute recall, his inability to lie or distort the truth. "We need help," she said finally. "This is bigger than both of us." The next morning, Sarah made a phone call that would change their lives forever. Lisa Rodriguez was an investigative journalist with the Portland Tribune, known for her thorough research and fearless reporting on corporate corruption. Sarah had met her years ago during a library board meeting and had always been impressed by her integrity. "Lisa, it's Sarah Chen from the library," she began when the reporter answered. "I need to speak with you about something unusual. My son has discovered some financial irregularities that I think you should see." "Financial irregularities?" Lisa's interest was immediately piqued. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that involve Morrison Financial and numbers that don't add up," Sarah replied, glancing at Daniel, who was listening intently from across the room. An hour later, Lisa Rodriguez sat in the library's small conference room, her laptop open and notepad ready, staring in amazement at the work of an 11-year-old boy. Daniel had laid out his findings with scientific precision, creating a comprehensive analysis that would have impressed forensic accountants. "This is extraordinary," Lisa murmured, reviewing Daniel's timeline. "Where did you learn to do this kind of analysis?" "I just read the documents and remembered what they said," Daniel answered simply. "Then I noticed the numbers didn't match, so I made charts to see the patterns better." Lisa looked at Sarah, then back at Daniel. "Do you understand what you've uncovered here?" Daniel nodded solemnly. "Mr. Morrison is taking money that doesn't belong to him and lying about it to the government and to people who invested in his company." "That's exactly what this looks like," Lisa confirmed, her reporter's instincts fully engaged. "But Daniel, I need to ask you something important. Are you absolutely certain about these numbers? Can you remember exactly where you found each piece of information?" "I remember everything," Daniel said matter-of-factly. Page 247 of the 2023 annual report says Morrison Financial had net profits of $847 million. Page 73 of their SEC 10K filing for the same period reports $623 million in net income. Form 1120 from their tax filing shows $312 million in taxable income. Lisa frantically scribbled notes, then pulled up digital copies of the same documents on her laptop. Every number Daniel quoted was exactly correct. "This is photographic memory," Lisa said to Sarah in amazement. "He's not just intelligent, he literally remembers everything he's read." "It's been both a gift and a challenge," Sarah admitted. "Teachers don't always know what to do with him." Lisa spent the next 2 hours verifying Daniel's findings, cross-referencing documents and checking his mathematical calculations. Everything was accurate. The discrepancies were real, systematic, and suggested fraud on a massive scale. "I'm going to need to investigate this further," Lisa told them. "But if your son is right, this could be the biggest financial scandal in Oregon's history." 2 weeks later, Lisa's preliminary investigation had confirmed Daniel's findings and uncovered even more damaging evidence. Morrison Financial had been manipulating their books for years, hiding profits from tax authorities while inflating them for investors. The scheme had netted Marcus Morrison personally over $200 million in illegal gains, but exposing the fraud would require more than just a newspaper article. Lisa needed official investigation, which meant involving law enforcement and financial regulators, and that meant Daniel would have to testify about his discoveries. "I don't want him involved in this publicly," Sarah said during a meeting with Lisa and Detective James Washington from the Portland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. "He's just a child." "I understand your concern," Detective Washington replied, "but his testimony could be crucial. His memory is the key to proving the timeline of fraud." Daniel, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "I want to help. If Mr. Morrison is stealing money, people should know." Sarah's protective instincts warred with her respect for Daniel's moral clarity. Finally, she nodded. "But we do this carefully. I won't have my son turned into a circus act." The investigation moved quickly once official authorities became involved. Federal agents executed search warrants on Morrison Financial's offices, seizing computers and financial records that confirmed Daniel's analysis. Marcus Morrison was arrested at his downtown Portland penthouse on charges of securities fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. The news broke like a thunderclap through Portland's business community. Morrison Financial, once considered one of Oregon's most stable investment firms, was revealed to be built on systematic fraud. Investors had lost hundreds of millions, pension funds were compromised, and the ripple effects spread throughout the regional economy. But the most shocking aspect of the story wasn't the scale of the fraud, it was how it had been discovered. An 11-year-old boy with a photographic memory, reading public documents in the library, had uncovered what teams of auditors and regulators had missed. The media attention was immediate and intense. Daniel's story captured the public imagination. The quiet, brilliant child whose gift for remembering everything had exposed one of the biggest corporate frauds in state history. But with the attention came scrutiny, skepticism, and pressure that no child should have to bear. "How do we know this kid isn't making it all up?" demanded Morrison's defense attorney during a pretrial hearing. "You're asking us to believe that an 11-year-old discovered financial irregularities that supposedly went undetected for years." The answer came during Daniel's testimony to a federal grand jury. Sitting in a chair that had to be adjusted for his small stature, Daniel calmly recited from memory the specific documents, page numbers, and exact figures that proved Morrison's guilt. He answered every question with precision, never hesitating, never contradicting himself. The defendant's 2021 annual report, page 156, states that Morrison Financial maintained liquid assets of $2.3 billion, Daniel testified. But their Federal Reserve filing from the same quarter reported only $1.7 billion in liquid assets. The difference of $600 million appears in a Cayman Islands account under the name Morrison Holdings, which is controlled by the defendant personally. Federal prosecutors had never seen testimony so detailed and devastating, delivered with such quiet confidence by someone so young. Daniel's perfect recall made every piece of evidence unshakable. Marcus Morrison's trial became a media sensation, but not for the reasons his expensive legal team had hoped. Instead of discrediting Daniel's testimony, the proceedings only highlighted the boy's extraordinary abilities and moral courage. Expert witnesses confirmed that Daniel's photographic memory was real and that his analysis was mathematically sound. This child has an exceptional gift, testified Dr. Patricia Williams, a neuropsychologist who had evaluated Daniel. His ability to retain and recall information is literally 1 in 10 million. But more importantly, he has used that gift to serve justice. The defense's attempts to portray Daniel as confused or coached backfired spectacularly. Every time they challenged his recollections, Daniel calmly provided additional details that further supported the prosecution's case. "You claim to remember the exact page number of a document you read months ago," Morrison's lead attorney pressed during cross-examination. "Isn't it possible you're mistaken?" "No, sir," Daniel replied politely. "It was page 247 of the 2023 annual report. The paragraph began with, 'Morrison Financial is pleased to report record profits,' and the specific figure was listed in bold type as $847,336,492. The same page had a photograph of Mr. Morrison shaking hands with the mayor at a charity event. The attorney, visibly deflated. Prosecutors later verified that Daniel's description was accurate down to the smallest detail. Marcus Morrison was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His personal assets, worth over $800 million, were seized to compensate defrauded investors. Morrison Financial was liquidated, with its legitimate assets distributed to creditors and clients. But the trial's conclusion was only the beginning of a new chapter for Daniel and Sarah. The publicity surrounding the case had transformed their quiet lives into something neither had expected or wanted. "We've received over 200 interview requests," Sarah told Lisa Rodriguez during one of their regular coffee meetings. "Universities want to study Daniel, TV shows want to feature him, and people keep calling him a boy genius, like he's some kind of exhibit." Lisa nodded sympathetically. "How is Daniel handling all the attention?" "He doesn't understand why people are so surprised," Sarah replied with a tired smile. "He says he just did what anyone would do if they saw something wrong." The truth was that Daniel's extraordinary gift had indeed set him apart from other children, but not in the way the media portrayed. His perfect memory came with its own challenges. He remembered every harsh word, every moment of rejection, every time he'd been told he was too intense or too different. But he also remembered every act of kindness, every moment of encouragement, and every time Sarah had defended him against those who didn't understand. Most importantly, he remembered his grandmother's words from before the adoption. "Intelligence is a gift, but character is a choice." 6 months after Morrison's conviction, Sarah and Daniel's lives had settled into a new normal. The media attention had largely died down, replaced by other stories and newer scandals. Daniel had returned to his beloved corner table in the library, though now he focused on astronomy and physics rather than financial documents. "No more corporate fraud investigations," Sarah had said with mock sternness. "You've done enough detective work for one lifetime." Daniel had agreed readily, but Sarah noticed he still couldn't help pointing out inconsistencies when he encountered them. Just the week before, he'd identified errors in a scientific journal that had led to a correction being published. The Morrison case had also brought unexpected opportunities. The state of Oregon had established the Daniel Chen Fellowship for Gifted Children, providing resources and support for kids whose exceptional abilities made traditional education challenging. Several universities had offered full scholarships for when Daniel was ready for higher education. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in how Daniel was perceived by his peers and teachers. The quiet, intense boy who had once been considered too different was now recognized as someone special. Not because of his fame, but because of his courage to speak truth regardless of the personal cost. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Sarah asked Daniel one evening as they walked home from the library through the familiar Portland streets. "What?" Daniel replied, his mind clearly engaged with some complex problem. "You never let being different make you bitter or angry. You used your gift to help people, even when it was difficult." Daniel considered this seriously, as he considered everything. "Grandma used to say that gifts are meant to be shared, not hidden. I just shared mine." Sarah smiled, remembering the elderly woman who had first recognized Daniel's extraordinary mind and had fought for his adoption when no one else wanted the weird kid who remembered everything. She would have been proud of how her grandson had used his remarkable abilities. The Morrison financial scandal had revealed the dark side of unchecked corporate power, but it had also demonstrated something more hopeful: that truth has a way of emerging, even when it comes from the most unexpected sources. An 11-year-old boy with a photographic memory had reminded an entire city that intelligence comes in many forms, that wisdom isn't limited by age, and that sometimes the most important insights come from those who see the world differently. Daniel Chen continued reading, continued learning, and continued growing into the remarkable young man his grandmother had always known he could become. He still spent his afternoons in the library, still remembered everything he read, and still had the quiet confidence that came from knowing his gift had been used for good. And somewhere in a federal prison, Marcus Morrison served his sentence while investigators continued unraveling the web of financial crimes that Daniel's perfect memory had first exposed. The boy who nobody wanted had become the catalyst for justice, proving that extraordinary minds, nurtured with love and understanding, could indeed change the world. The fluorescent lights of Portland Public Library still hummed overhead, but now they illuminated not just the pages of books, but the bright future of a child whose different way of seeing had made all the difference. Daniel's story had become part of the library's permanent collection, a reminder that knowledge, memory, and moral courage could triumph over corruption and greed. In the end, Daniel Chen had done exactly what his adoptive mother had always believed he could do. He had used his extraordinary gift to make the world a little better, one perfectly remembered detail at a time. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.